Great, thank you very much. So actually, I did my PhD down here in Southampton in the south of England and came to London a lot for these kind of events, but that was quite some time ago, and I've been out of the country for now about 12 years. So it's very nice to come back to this part of the world. In the meantime, you can see an affiliation there, which is one hint of a trace of where I've been. So this was funded partly by the FNR in Luxembourg, and that funded Semen Yurkov's PhD thesis. So this is the origin of the work. But firstly, let us put us all on the same page. And I think if anyone is an exception in the room, please let me know just for interest. But does everyone have one of these? Yes? Okay. Okay, so now let's think about this analytically. What do I reveal when I make a contactless payment? What information do I reveal? Okay, so let's have a look at it. Now, okay, so they've learned a little bit, so at least my name is not printed on the front, nor is my card number, so when I make the payment, at least some information is hidden. I reveal the payment system. That's quite reasonable, so in this case it's MasterCard. And of course, you can say, well, that probably is essential because I need to check it's a valid card that is issued by something, so therefore I need to look up a public key of something to check this card, and therefore revealing that it is MasterCard is a reasonable thing to do, okay? Anything else that's revealed? The bank is revealed, but that's not necessary, but the banks like their branding, okay? So I'll give that away. But apart from that, surely, because since we've been doing cryptography well since the 1970s, therefore, that's the only information that is revealed because everything is done by a cryptographic protocol between the terminal of the merchant and the card. Yes, that's completely the reasonable assumption to make. Okay, so there's a lot of people who know that is not the case. So this is our baseline situation that we have here. This is coming around for a number of reasons, and we can look into them a little bit. So firstly, how do these payments work? So we have the card and the terminal. This is where you pay at the merchant. And between the card and the terminal, there's the EMV protocol. This is what we're going to study. But it's useful to know the back end as well. What happens is when you make a transaction, the bank of the terminal is contacted, and they, through the payment system, which could be Visa or MasterCard, they transmit a cryptogram to the bank of the card. So you can see the cryptogram is generated here in this transaction, and it propagates through the network. Either that is online or offline. Online means that the bank is contacted during the transaction, and offline means you create the cryptogram, and then asynchronously, when you connect to the bank, you transmit the cryptogram, okay? So there's a bunch of infrastructure here. And there are known to be, so this is not my contribution, there are known to be insecure configurations. One piece of work is mentioned here from ETH. That's from 2023. There's some good work from Birmingham. I saw someone here from Birmingham. Also from Surrey, where people have found a lot of ways of bypassing pins, for instance, by exploiting the fact, really, a fundamental requirement in the EMV that it's backwards compatible, which means you have all the previous versions, which were insecure, also implemented in the card to some extent, and then you can play versions off each other, so you pretend that one side is in one mode and one side is in the other mode. So here's an example of this. Well, let's see the protocol first. I'll give an example in a minute. So this is the EMV protocol. And part of the problem here is inside the protocol, there is a whole number of things which are transmitted in the clear. The first thing here I've highlighted is the PDOL, which is the mode of operation. Remember I said the mode of operation is important. So that is not secured. We also have the PAN and the expiry date. The PAN is basically an account number which is used for routing inside the payment system. The expiry date also reveals information because with high probability I can distinguish two people by their expiry date, yes, in a crowd. The application transaction counter, that's also revealing something if it's incrementing. and then I see a similar number, then there's a high probability again it's the same person. So there's a good deal of information which is personally identifying here. And as a result, there's a number of threats that we face. Firstly, there's a passive attacker who can sit by a terminal to a range of up to 20 meters. So that's a physical limit. Whether it can actually be done at 20 meters, that's another question. They can just listen to these communications and pick up the PAN and the expiry date, transmitted in the clear on the air, and use this to identify the individuals involved, and at the point of sale, even see the transaction details, which are also sent in the clear. Okay? So you can profile people at points of sale, and this is passively. There's also an active threat where basically you approach someone, and in the proximity you can start the card, because the card will start whenever anything talks to it, so you can do that wirelessly via a phone, or a more sophisticated device to do it at a decent range. And then you can just ask for this information, ask for the PAN, and then you can re-identify people, okay? So this is a threat to privacy. Furthermore, within the ecosystem itself, you're revealing a lot of information that you do not need to reveal to the merchant. So they can track you. Of course, they love that. But it's not necessarily the case that we want that going forwards when we take into account the rights of the citizens involved. So there's this aspect of legal privacy and data minimization that we want to take into account as well. So these are all privacy threats. So basically there is no privacy, I would say, in this transaction at all. And the security is also quite severe. So this is what I mean about the playing modes of each other. So what we have here is a card and a terminal. We have two modes here. So the card is saying that it wants to do things online. Online, remember, means that the bank is contacted with the PIN during the transaction. So, of course, it doesn't expect the PIN at all. But the attacker has manipulated the mode to say that it's, in fact, an offline transaction, which will require a PIN to be sent to the card. And what does the eavesdropper do? Well, when it comes to presenting the PIN, it says, the terminal here says, here's a challenge, here's a nonce, or give me a challenge, okay? It sends a random nonce, that the attacker can generate that, of course. Then the terminal sends the PIN encrypted such that only the card can read it. But of course, if the response is just a plain text message saying success, you don't even need to open this message in order to reply, okay? And then we proceed to the end, the cryptogram is generated, and we fail something called agreement, which is a property which is used for authentication. So this is clearly not a good protocol. This is one of many modes that you can do to play things off. I think people have done some things that are a lot more sophisticated, but this is a basic idea. One is in one mode, one's in the other mode, and people get confused, okay? So this is, again, coming from backwards compatibility. So we don't necessarily want to implement that protocol and adhere to that standard where we're backwards compatible when we want to implement an update to this protocol. Okay, so where are we going? So we do want a bit more privacy, and we also want to solve this security problem. And we are not the only people. Of course, the banks want to some extent, and MasterCard came up with RFC about 10 years ago, which has eventually reached one of the specifications last year. And the idea is what you do is, of course, you do some Diffie-Hellman handshake at the beginning, and then you encrypt the messages. In fact, that's not quite what it does. It actually encrypts some content of the messages for backwards compatibility and so on, but nobody's investigated that yet. This is implemented in something called Kernel 8. That's from June 2023. And some threats to privacy that I mentioned before, particularly this passive threat, standing next to a merchant and snooping on the information that's in the plain text, that is actually countered. But data minimization is not improved, and the merchant is still revealing, well, everything has been revealed to the merchant. And also we have the possibility to still perform this active attack, because of course, anyone can be the terminal, including the attacker, and they can just ask for a handshake and then ask for the PAN and re-identify people again. So only one of these threats that I mentioned before is really tackled by this improvement. And as I say again, backwards compatibility is a problem here. So what we've done, and this is what I'll present in the rest of the talk, is we've analyzed firstly this update due to MasterCard. And this is published in CSF in 2022, okay? Where we found that if you can modify this key agreement protocol slightly by using a particular scheme for your signatures, then it's possible even to protect against active attackers, okay? But that's just looking at the key agreement part of the protocol. And then we have to say, well, how would we redesign the whole protocol so that we take that requirement and then we extend it right through the payment process? And that's what this second part of the protocol, this is a UTX protocol, which we'll get to in a bit. But firstly, let's start with the smaller protocol. This is a proposal by MasterCard. So we have a blinded Diffie-Hellman protocol. This is MasterCard's proposal from 2014 or something like this. What you do, well, you have a card here. It has some kind of hidden parameter. This is a secret parameter. This is its public key. And it has a signature on the public key, which is signed by the payment system, S. Okay, this is Visa or MasterCard have signed the public key to say this is a valid card issued by Visa. Okay. We then do a standard Diffie-Hellman handshake where we generate some parameters on both sides. And we take into account that we're multiplying this public key of the card in the process, okay? So we have this Diffie-Hellman handshake, which contains in it this particular public key. And essentially, every time you present this, it's going to look different, isn't it? Because this parameter A is going to be generated fresh each time, okay? So this is a blinded Diffie-Hellman handshake. And then what happens is you have this shared key which you've generated, and inside you transmit the public key of the card, the blinding factor, and the signature on the particular public key. Now, can anyone see the flaw here yet, in terms of privacy? Yes. Okay, that's another kind of problem. Yes, yes. That's not the problem I was meaning, though.
Aren't you transmitting the whole signature?
Yes,
inside?
We're transmitting the whole signature, and it looks the same every time, and then we can use that as personally identifying information. Okay, every single time even though we blinded the the public key, we haven't blinded the signature. Okay. Yes. So there's an obvious fix here, which is, yes, indeed, we're going to play around with this, and we're going to use a smarter signature scheme. So firstly, remember, it's possible to attack this now from a range of 20 meters. So we have actually protected against certain threats, because now at least you need to be nearby to ask for that signature, yes? You can't just eavesdrop to get that signature. You have to be an active participant, so you have protected at a certain radius. It is an improvement. But we are interested in protecting right down to 1 meter, like as people really in close proximity. Can we really protect privacy at this level? And of course, we're going to introduce a new signature scheme, and one where you have a blinding factor. So what we have is the signature. If we multiply it by some blinding factor, then we get the blinded certificate still signed by the card, still signed by the payment system S, okay? So the protocol looks like this now, and you see that when we transmit the key, we transmit the whole of the parameter here, and we transmit the signature blinded, okay? And now every time, also the certificate looks different every time you talk to the card, yet it is still a valid certificate signed by the payment system. Okay, so we can still check, yes, this is a Visa issued card, this is a MasterCard issued card, etc. Okay, it looks quite simple, this fix, but we should check that we've got it right, and this is where we get to our V inside this the theme of this session, isn't it? So we formulate privacy here as an unlinkability problem, which is basically what you do is you take two scenarios, one where I am using the same card twice, so the same signature and the same parameters are being used each time, and I have another scenario where I have two cards which are actually using different parameters. And I have unlinkability if these two things are indistinguishable. So you can formulate this as a bisimilarity problem. That's how we're going to do it, okay? And what we do is we take a process. So if you don't know the pi calculus, it doesn't matter too much, but this is a pi calculus process. So we generate the keys for the payment system. We output the public key of the payment system. So this is so it's important so that people can actually verify the card and interact with the card. We generate a new card, and we generate infinitely many cards. That's what the bang means. And then we run infinitely many sessions with that card, with those parameters. Okay, the ch here is just creating a fresh channel each time, so we have a new endpoint for each session. That's just a convenience, okay? On the other hand, the specification varies only in one character. See this bang here? Remember that said we have infinitely many sessions with that one card. Here we have only one session with that one card, okay? So that means every time we use a card, we destroy it and we never use it again, okay? And then you have privacy because it is not even the same cards, therefore I can't track that card. It's never actually used twice, okay? And if we cannot distinguish between these, then we are secure, or we are private. We have unlinkability, okay? And what I'm going to use here is a notion of bisimilarity called quasi-open bisimilarity. The reason is because it gives very nice compositional reasoning properties. It's a congruence. Bisimilarities for the pi calculus are not automatically a congruence. This one is, and in fact, it's a complete congruence with respect to a testing equivalence. So there's some echoes of the very first talk in the day in both of those statements there. And the nice thing about that is that if I have proven unlinkability for that very small system, then I know that I can plug it into another context, and I know that still unlinkability is going to hold, which means that even if you have the terminals present, if I bring them into the specification, so now I have a terminal which is interacting with these cards, then I know still unlinkability is going to hold without having to do any further work, because I'm using compositional reasoning. I've reasoned about the small system, and it still holds for the larger systems where other components are in the network, okay? And we have a theorem here, and this is basically the congruence things. If the small implementation and the small specification are indistinguishable, that's this setting here where we didn't have the terminals, there we know that the full implementation, the specification with terminals included, is also unlinkable. So we're using a congruence property here. So this is one nugget of theory which we're applying within this process that I want to expose to you. And of course, there is a context, and what we do is we just take these two things, we plug it into this context, and we know that things are still going to be bisimilar, okay? That is thanks to, again, using bisimulation, which is a congruence relation, which is not given for free for the pi calculus, okay? In contrast, now I'm going to use another nugget of theory. What we can appeal to something called Hennessy-Milner duality. So whenever we're talking about an equivalence problem, it's nice when you have also a modal logic, and the modal logic basically is going to allow us to tell us how to distinguish two things whenever something fails. Okay, so suppose I'm in a setting, which is the first setting that we saw, the original proposal by MasterCard. Remember, there's an attack on this, but what is the attack? Well, I know that bisimilarity is going to fail, but if I use a Hennessy-Milner duality, then I know also there exists a modal logic formula that I can write down, which will hold for one side, but not hold for the other side. This always exists. We can prove it. We have a completeness result. Whenever something fails, we know such a formula exists. And this formula happens to describe exactly attack strategy. Basically, it's saying, I get the public key of the payment system, I run one session with the card, I run another session with the card, and then I check that the certificates match. Okay? You see? This is coming out of the theory of process algebras, where you have bisimilarities and this duality with the modal logic. It's a nice use of that inside the security setting. In contrast, so that's how you disprove something. How do you prove something? Well, what you do is I take my small specification and by hand I generate some big relation, then I check that it is a quasi-open bisimulation, this relation, okay? That's the methodology here. Finding that relation is quite difficult, but once you have that relation, it kind of acts like a certificate because it's relatively easy to check it because it's routine. You're just unfolding the transition rules and checking closure on the relation that you've defined. So that's how these two methodologies work. So when you're disproving, you have the modal logic formula, and when you're proving, you have the bisimulation relation. Okay. Now, we have a few minutes to talk about the bigger protocol. Remember, that was just protecting the key agreement. So we had only done the beginning of the protocol. How would we extend it right the way through that first protocol that I said was broken at the very beginning, the EMV protocol that we use currently today? So as I said, backwards compatibility is a problem, so we don't really want to just change the protocol as it is. What we want to do is we want to go back to the requirements. What are the requirements for such a protocol? So the functional requirements is that it needs to be fast and using the chips on the card, needs to support the PIN. We need to have different types of transaction, online, offline. This is for resilience purposes. Contactless, high value, low value. We need these kind of requirements, of course. So nothing changes there. But we now have the security requirement, which should have been there, but is not, because we saw the attack earlier. There's many attacks like this for PIN bypassing, but we want authentication. So the terminal should be able to authenticate the card. So when it is basically talking to the card, really the card is there, and really the card sent and received all the messages which are sent and received by the terminal. So all the messages match throughout the protocol. That's authentication. We also have a bunch of other things we want to check, but the new one is this unlinkability property. We also want unlinkability. We want privacy. Okay? And there's different subtle variations of unlinkability when we start to look at the bigger protocol, and we can look at these properties in another way. But I think for now, let's just give the protocol. So this is the full protocol. We have some kind of handshake at the beginning, similar to what we had before. We have some kind of exchange of certificates here and generation of the transaction. This is the application cryptogram, the AC. And then we have some kind of interaction with the payment system. And in fact, the bank here is in fact the whole network. What I mean by bank is the bank of the terminal, bank of the card holder, bank of all of the intermediaries involved in that process. So there's a bunch of checks which need to be done by that network. Okay. And if we zoom in the yellow part in the middle, this is where the key novelties are. What we're going to do is what happens after the key agreement. So now this is all on an encrypted channel. Is instead of just presenting the certificate as you saw earlier, what we do is we say, the terminal says, I can prove to you that it is the current month. It is now a particular month of the year, and that comes from another authority. So there's authority that will say that we have now rolled over to the next month. And this means that we don't just present any old certificate, we present the certificate for the current month. Now the advantage there is I don't need to reveal my expiry date even. You see that? Because I'm saying I am valid now in the current month. I'm not saying I expire in a particular month, and therefore I've revealed much less information again. So we're trying to go for data minimization there, okay? So we present the certificate, which is specifically for this month. That's what the MM here is. And this is a certificate saying it is the current month. That's from the terminal to the card. Here is the signature, which is valid in the current month, signed by the payment system, saying that, yes, I am valid in the current month. Okay? The PIN acts as normal, but now it's on a secure channel, so it can't be interfered with as before. And the cryptogram is not generated and given to the terminal, but it is there's a key which is presented for the bank of the terminal, and it will be routed via the terminal to the bank of the terminal without actually the merchant receiving that information. So you're presenting only the central information to the merchant as well in the process. You're not revealing the entire cryptogram. Okay? I don't want to talk much more about this protocol, but there are subtleties here just to give a hint. Notice that the month has to progress, and not all terminals will progress immediately on the start of the month. So you need to be able to tolerate maybe also responding to the previous month, and that's basically the only information that is revealed is, have I updated in the most recent month? Because I can ask for the month certificate from 2 months ago, okay? That's the only information revealed in that setting. Now, I think we have to wrap up here. But of course, we can do unlinkability again. The proof's a bit bigger. And the relationship between the quasi-open bisimilarity becomes more difficult to check. This is not a surprise. Currently, this is manual. And still, what we do is then once we have this relation, we check the conditions of quasi-open bisimilarity, which are basically the standard one for bisimilarity. If I can do an action, then I can do the action the other side. The data is kind of respected. Basically, the knowledge is preserved. And also, I have this is a quasi-open situation. Is that if I can instantiate some variables with some new information, then that still stays within the relation. That's the novel bit. And that gives us the congruence relation. So we are now in the V and VeTSS. Have we verified things? Yes. So we now have a protocol. It's a protocol design. To be respecting the requirements of the infrastructure, the current infrastructure, so there's not a huge update here, functional requirements, etc. You notice there's a question mark next to feasibility, like we haven't implemented it. We need engineers to go and test that it really is realistic for, like, say, using on the London Underground, yes. But we have proven in ProVerif the security requirements, authentication holds for this, so there's no PIN bypass. And we have proven manually this big unlinkability proof that you saw earlier, which shows that privacy is respected. Okay.
Thank you. So, any questions? Yes, we have one or two.
So in Pete's talk at the beginning, he talked about threats and risks.
I can't hear anything at all there.
Sorry.
So my hearing is also not so good. I have to warn you.
In Pete's talk earlier, he mentioned about threats and risks. So here, by making everything very private, it's hard to then kind of audit what happened. So is there anything there that you thought about?
Yes, yes. Okay, so this is the right question. It's a question which people will ask in industry is that, you've made everything private, but we need to check things. But then, of course, you can be more controlled about who checks things by putting in an intermediate layer between the cards and the bank, which has some kind of authority for a particular terminal to provide and obtain information under certain conditions, and therefore you can implement these services, I believe, still. But that's future work.
Oh, thanks for the talk. When you were doing the manual proofs of unlinkability, you were showing pi-calculus. Yes. So how come you can't do it in applied pi-calculus and prove it directly in ProVerif, the second property?
Okay, so what are the limits of the current tools, basically, you're asking? Yes, so we can, I believe we can prove now, using the state-of-the-art as of like 1 year ago, we can now prove at least the smaller protocol that I gave you, using tools. The larger protocol fails in unexpected ways. My suspicion is it's just the structure of the protocol, because we have the banks, the terminals, and everything, and it just doesn't know like how to cope with this structure yet. But it's feasible in the future to be able to improve these tools to do this. Yep.
Thanks.
Any other questions? We have maybe time for one more.
Is there any provision in the new standards for the evidence to the end consumer when the new privacy enhanced protocol is being used?
Right. Wait a minute. So your question is about how would we prove that
No,
these?
if I pitch up as a customer, I'll do it
Yes.
properly. If I pitch up as a customer at a shop, how will I know whether the transaction with my card is privacy enhanced before I start it, so I can choose to go elsewhere?
So that comes at the very beginning of the protocol. I just say unlinkable. Okay. So there's a selection of the payment system you use, and I just say unlinkable payment system, and that will be sufficient to know that, because the terminal will need to then follow the protocol, otherwise the card will not talk to it. Yes. So even if the terminal is compromised, this protocol works, by the way. We can prove this.
Okay, so I think we might end